Governments and companies everywhere should be accustomed by now to the risk and the reality of cyber attacks. But often healthcare systems and organisations are lagging behind other sectors in cyber preparedness. It's a topic that a Wish report and our next forum panel discussion have been exploring, looking at the digital solutions which can revolutionise healthcare and mitigate cyber threats.
Hello, everyone. I'm Foli Batibo in Doha. It's my pleasure to be moderating this panel on cybersecurity and healthcare systems on behalf of the World Innovation Summit for Health 2020. Welcome to you all. Thank you to the Wish 2020 team, the Qatar Foundation, and all its partners for bringing us together for this unique virtual experience. Now, like all aspects of our lives, digital technology has brought extraordinary changes to the global healthcare system over the past 10 years. It has single-handedly transformed the way we treat, manage, deliver, and provide patient care to millions of people. And crucially, it's increased access to people who desperately need it. But the fast-paced changes, adoption of new digital technologies and tools have brought with them unprecedented threats through online attacks. Cybersecurity has become an urgent priority for healthcare providers around the world, with the goal of building strong defense systems that can act against cyber attacks. The effects of cyber attacks are many, but they can, of course, erode patient trust and even put their safety at risk, as well as their private data. Now, the number of cyber attacks on the healthcare systems around the world have significantly increased in the past 5 years. And it's become worse since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Cyber criminals have exploited the widespread fear and confusion caused by the pandemic. We've seen a new wave of cyber attacks against healthcare agencies, including the World Health Organization, where earlier this year, scammers impersonating WHO in emails were targeting the general public in order to solicit donations to a fictitious fund. Others have also been targeted, including the UK's NHS, through the so-called WannaCry cyber attack 3 years ago that completely blocked its system, preventing staff from accessing critical patient data. And similar attacks have also targeted healthcare providers in Singapore, South Africa, Australia, and the United States. So it's a worldwide phenomenon. Now, data breaches cost the healthcare industry billions of dollars every year. And these attacks pose more than just a threat to information security. They are, of course, a threat to patient care and can interrupt patient care. And yet, despite this increasing and critical threat, healthcare systems and organizations around the world still lag behind other sectors in developing their cyber readiness. So we have to ask ourselves, why has the healthcare industry become such a target for cyber attacks? And what can hospitals, other healthcare providers, and public health organizations do to protect their networks and their patients from this threat? These are some of the questions that we'll be addressing as we discuss safeguarding our healthcare system, a global framework for cybersecurity, a report written and published for WISH under the leadership of Dr. Saira Ghafoor, Nikki O'Brien, Guy Martin, Emilia Grass, and Mike Durkin. And we have the honor of having Dr. Saira Ghafoor on our panel today. And this report looked at existing cybersecurity frameworks around the world and provides us with a new set of guidelines for healthcare organizations to address these challenges and establish more robust systems. More on the report in just a moment, but first, we're also thrilled to have with us some of the most trusted experts on cybersecurity and healthcare who will be sharing their experiences and perspectives as well as solutions on how to raise awareness and improve cybersecurity in this sector. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panelists today. Let me introduce them to you. We have Arvind Sivaramakrishnan, who's the Chief Information Officer at the Apollo Hospitals Group, which is based in India. Dr. Ahmad El Margamid is the Executive Director of the Qatar Computing Research Institute. Welcome to you. Vartan Sarkisian is founder and CEO of Apomatics, a risk management software company. Also with us, Dr. Deep Chana, who's the co-director of the Institute for Security Science and Technology at Imperial College London. And as I mentioned, Dr. Saira Ghafoor, Digital Health Lead at the Institute of Global Health Innovation at Imperial College London. A warm welcome to all of you. I very much look forward to having this very important and interesting discussion with you. And I'm also happy to say that this session will be highly interactive. We very much look forward to including questions from all of you watching us online. So please do send them to us using the comment section on your screen, and we'll attempt to put as many as we can to our panelists with the hope, of course, of getting as many diverse views as possible. And by the end, we hope to provide you with concrete actions on how we can raise awareness and improve cybersecurity in healthcare. So to kick off our event, it's my pleasure to welcome our forum chair, Dr. Saira Ghafoor, who is going to give us an introduction of the subject and overview of the report put together for this session. Take a look.
Hello, my name is Dr. Saira Ghafoor. I am the lead for digital health at the Institute of Global Health Innovation at Imperial College, and I'm the lead for the Safeguarding Our Health Systems, a Global Framework for Cybersecurity report. So the past decade has seen a surge in the use of new digital technologies across all healthcare settings, which has led to significant improvements in access and care delivery. A key challenge, however, is to keep any health data safe and secure, and to ensure that the patients and public can trust healthcare organisations with highly confidential information. The number of cyber attacks on healthcare organisations has significantly increased in the past 5 years. In healthcare, these attacks pose more than just a threat to information security. They can jeopardise patient safety. Through the COVID pandemic, we have seen a new wave of cyber attacks against healthcare organisations, including the WHO and the CDC. Other major attacks have included the WannaCry ransomware attack on the National Health Service in the UK in 2017. This exposes stark vulnerabilities within healthcare systems and the potential impact on the safe delivery of healthcare. In this report, we look at existing cybersecurity frameworks worldwide, and we examine why, despite being one of the sectors most targeted by cyber attackers, that the healthcare sector remains one of the worst adopters of cybersecurity frameworks. This report identifies key insights in the international healthcare cybersecurity landscape and also proposes a global cybersecurity readiness framework for healthcare organisations. The challenges in cybersecurity planning across high, middle and low-income health systems are varied. There has been a lack of investment and support to raise awareness of its global importance, and urgent work is needed to help healthcare organisations develop a common language and scale up cybersecurity planning. In response to this, we have asked members of the leading health systems network, LHSN, an international group of health systems and providers hosted at Imperial College London, about their organisational efforts related to cybersecurity. An initial survey of LHSN member institutions explored the current global cybersecurity landscape. We then convened a group of key experts in the areas of IT, cybersecurity, health policy and health systems to provide input on the most relevant elements of a global framework for cyber readiness in healthcare. This resulted in the ECHO framework, Essentials of Cybersecurity in Healthcare Organizations. The ECHO framework outlines the 6 primary dimensions to consider when scaling up cybersecurity in a healthcare organization. This framework may act as a minimum standard or as an aspirational checklist, and this depends on an organization's resources and its cyber maturity. Developing effective global guidance on cybersecurity is challenging, and we understand this. While the ECHO framework is a starting point, a number of additional steps are needed to be taken by all countries across the world to cement cybersecurity readiness for healthcare in the future. The building blocks to improve cybersecurity are outlined as a series of policy recommendations in this report. Cybersecurity needs to be included in the design and implementation of new technologies and systems. We need to promote a globally validated and unified cybersecurity framework. The readiness framework presented in this report has been designed to be used across all settings, including high, low, and middle-income countries. And this introduces a common language as a first step. The next step is to validate the framework, and this will require strong partnerships at a global level. We need to develop and introduce practical context-based cybersecurity policies that can be adopted by all countries. And we need to engage with multilateral donors on cybersecurity as a critical element of digital health and patient safety. And one of the most crucial elements is to promote awareness, education, and training on cybersecurity for all healthcare workers. While there's much to do in this area, we hope that this report will start as a serving point for health systems to assess and ultimately improve cybersecurity. Improved awareness, governance, and accountability in this area are essential to protect healthcare organisations from future attacks and ensure that we provide safe care for all patients. Thank you very much, and we look forward to having you join us in the discussion panel later.
Very much. Thank you, Dr. Saira Ghafoor, for that informative and insightful look into your report. It certainly laid the foundation for our panel discussion. So let's get to that now. Let me just briefly reintroduce our panelists in case you're just joining us now. We have once again with us Arvind Sivaramakrishnan, who's the Chief Information Officer at Apollo Hospitals Enterprises. Dr. Ahmad El Margamid is the Chief Executive Director of the Qatar Computing Research Institute. We have with us as well Vartan Sarkisian, founder and CEO of Apolmatix. Dr. Deep Chana is co-director of the Institute of Security at Imperial College London also. And of course, Dr. Saira Ghafoor, whom you just saw a few moments ago there. Dr. Ghafoor is the Digital Health Lead at the Institute of Global Health Innovation at Imperial College London. Welcome to you all once again. And to all of you watching us online, a reminder that you can send your questions and comments on the comments section of your screen. We'll be more than happy to put them to our panelists later in the discussion. So let me start with you, Dr. Al Margamid, here in Doha. I know that you've previously said that there is no silver bullet solutions to the growing global cybersecurity challenges that we face today, and instead you're advocating for a better arsenal of tools, techniques, and countermeasures. Can you expand on that? What is that exactly? And in the current context that we're living in, cybersecurity in the healthcare system specifically? Turn your microphone on, Dr. Yes, there you go. There you go.
Good evening, everyone. Indeed, there isn't a silver bullet, whether it's to healthcare system security or any system security. Solutions that would work for large hospital settings would not work for enterprises of families of hospitals like we see now in Europe and in the US and so on. Would not work for smaller clinics. So it's important that we look at the various topics. For example, we have to look at privacy, we have to look at medical devices, we have to look at financial types of attacks, such as ransomware, we have to look at enterprise security. We have to cover many aspects of topics and to defend against various types of attacks. If I may, Folly, let me just take a brief moment to tell you about the Qatar Computing Research Institute, which is a part of Hamad bin Khalifa University. To put a context, we work in 4 areas of computer science. We work in language technologies, we work in social computing, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity. We have an interesting project that will be of interest to the audience and to the panelists, and that's Saha. Saha in Arabic is health. And in Saha, we gather information from all types of devices, all types of things such as Fitbits or genetic data and so on, and we put it in a blender and we try to manage chronic diseases such as diabetes and so on. And it's a platform that we do jointly with Hamad Medical Corporation, with Sidra, with Cornell, with Weill Cornell Medical College here in Doha, and other participants. Last but not least, we also run the National Cybersecurity Research Lab for Qatar here in the Institute, and we run the Cyber Range. We work in terms of cybersecurity, we run abnormal user behavior, malicious emails, we worry about suspicious VPNs and dark web attacks, and so on. The other point that I want to mention is the importance of partnerships in this. We value international partnerships. We have a long-running partnership with the MIT CSAIL. We have a long-running partnership with Boeing. And also, we have a partnership with the Washington Institute for Business, Government, and Society. I have the honor to serve there as a distinguished fellow and a member of the advisory council. The Institute serves as trusted advisor on important commissions in the US, such as the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, the National Security Commission on AI, and so on. Why these partnerships are important? Because it's important to be part of the global discussion on policy, on research, and on industry directions. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to discuss, as the panel goes on, the 4 topics of privacy, medical devices, financial types of attacks like ransomware, and enterprise security in the context of cloud computing. Cloud made these things more prominent on IoT devices, bring your own devices, legacy systems, and so on and so forth. So in the ensuing discussions, I will take each one of those topics and I will detail them further.
Okay, we'd very much look forward to hearing that. And thank you for telling us about what you do at the Qatar Computing Research Institute and the importance of partnerships. But before we look at the solutions, let's go back to the origins, the root causes of the problem. And I want to bring in Arvind Sivaramakrishnan. Experts say, Arvind, that healthcare is 20 years behind banks when it comes to cybersecurity. Why is that? Why is it that many workers within the healthcare sector still don't recognize the connection between patient safety and cybersecurity?
It's the topic of healthcare, and traditionally we've always believed that it will not happen to me. So that goes with almost everything that we deal with in healthcare. That's why probably it's a little, not up to date as what we would call it. The second aspect is compared to the other industries, whether it's banking or automotive, healthcare is a little late to the game in terms of digital transformation. Not medical technology, but information technology that's powering medical technology and then powering health systems. So literally digital transformation that's enabling health systems. Compared to any other industry segments, it's late to the game. So this is probably why we are a little delayed. But having said we're a little delayed about it, it's a subject that covers everybody. Mm-hmm. It's a subject that deals with the entire organization. It's a subject that deals with me. It's a subject that deals with you because it's health that all of us are involved in. And like what Dr. Ahmed was mentioning and in Dr. Saira's note also, are financial implications to not just a person, but a society, an organization, literally an economy. So that's probably why it's getting more, though it started late, it's catching up at a pace that is not really desirable. This attention is not the attention that we need, but that's what it's getting. The other aspect is everybody is realizing the need for digital transformation in healthcare, because we are a planet of more than 1 billion people and we don't have healthcare capabilities to serve such a large community. Our supply to demand is always going to be large, and we're not going to make it up. But when you say we're not going to make it up, we're not giving up.
Right.
This is how do we get healthcare to everybody who needs it? That means technology. And that means that people can also, unfortunately, infringe on this technology to prevent certain things from happening. Why do they do that? I'm not going to go philosophical.
Right.
But
that's a whole other question there.
Absolutely.
Technology has to be made secure, of course. Fatah and Sarkisian, I want to hear about your experiences, based on your work as CEO and founder of Apomatics. What are some of the key challenges that your clients come to you with? And what is, in your opinion, are the continuous challenges that healthcare organizations and providers need to be aware of, even once they have a robust cybersecurity system in place?
Thank you, Foley. So if we take the first part of your question, first of all, we see a cultural challenge. It's the strong posture and the culture of cybersecurity or risk management is pretty much being neglected. And there are reasons for that as well. It's not being, I very much agree with Mr. Arvind. There's a concept of it will not happen to me. We've seen this throughout many years. And so it's not being prioritized. And so what really is needed in the healthcare industry is more of a leadership cultural change and an understanding to push that awareness through in order for them not to neglect it. So typically, especially when times get tough, or there's COVID, or there are other priorities, cybersecurity, certain technologies might take the front, but majority, especially risk management or compliance needs and so on, will typically get shoved down to the bottom, third or fourth in the list of priorities. And I understand that. I run a business. I get you quickly have to do something to make sure it works. Don't worry about that. We'll deal with that later. The other challenge that we keep seeing is a lack of expertise. So Security Magazine in 2020 just recently stated that 76% of cybersecurity experts are stating that there's a shortage globally for the topic of cybersecurity. And ISC Squared in last year, 2019, talked about a 4 million person shortage in the industry as well. So this is also driving this incapability or unwillingness to actually get things done. The other issue, the challenge that we see is an execution challenge. So this is another interesting statistic. UK breach survey talked about how 85% of basically leadership and boards state that cybersecurity risk management is important. But when you actually look at what's actually been done, if you average everything out, only 35% is actually executed. So there's a gap there, perhaps stemming from the shortage of expertise. And also other interesting things. For example, antivirus, it's almost ubiquitous. Everybody in all organizations have that running. It's nice, it's simple, it's there. But when, as Dr. Ahmed was saying earlier, that there's no silver bullet. You can't just have an antivirus, you have a variety of different things. And that's where, again, sort to say, the ball is being dropped. Right. And lastly, when you're managing these kinds of situations, you need to manage a variety of different elements. There are lack of solutions when it comes to risk management, really planning this together, especially for what I call small or less mature organizations. There are very complex, big GRC, governance, risk, compliance tools and software that large mature organizations can grab. But if you want something, if you're a small clinic, if you want to get going, get something started, you resolve to an Excel spreadsheet. And that naturally causes other issues because of Excel spreadsheets. Then you're keeping a track. It's not real time. You have a variety of these kinds of issues that stem from that as well.
Right.
So there are these multiple challenges that we continually see.
Well, let me bring in Dr. Saira Ghafoor on that. We heard there from the previous speaker about the challenges, including the cultural challenge. And you speak in the report, Dr. Saira Ghafoor, about the need for a commonality of language, particularly as cyber attacks become more complex with the potential to affect multiple national health systems simultaneously. Can you expand on that? How do we create a common language?
That's right. Thank you, Folly. So absolutely, we've seen that the number of cyber attacks is rising. And certainly from our survey that we did as part of the report, we saw that all of the respondents who took part in it saw that each of their organisations saw an increase in the number of cyber attacks that they've experienced in the past couple of years. And we know that cyber attacks are becoming more sophisticated, and we know that cyber hackers and attackers are now realising the potential of system-wide havoc they can essentially create. And because of that, there's a greater chance of large-scale cross-border cyber incidents. And we saw that in the WannaCry attack in 2017. The NHS in England was not the sole target, but certainly it was one of many targets across many different countries. And certainly healthcare is a critical part of any country's infrastructure. And if this is a cyber attack that's going across different countries, we need to be able to connect with other countries also being hit by that. And certainly if we've got that commonality of language, if we've got a framework such as ECHO framework, which we proposed in this report, and we understand all the different components, that would be part of that in terms of what we need as a healthcare framework. This will make it much easier to communicate, but also in terms of assessing cyber maturity in organisations when you're implementing changes, and also very important in terms of stepwise change when you're implementing new technologies into any given system, and will also help providers of any technology, whether it is kind of hardware or software, and knowing what's used in healthcare, it will help to improve that given setting.
Right. Deep Chana, Dr. Deep Chana, the report, Dr. Saira Ghafoor's report talks about a lack of funding and the need for investment and support. And one of the previous speakers addressed this to raise awareness about the global importance of cybersecurity in healthcare. There's urgent work needed to scale up cybersecurity planning, but the investment is not there. How big of an issue is that in your view?
Well, I mean, I think it's a huge issue, really. It's very well having lots of plans and policies in place, which of course is a critical component, but you need to back that up with action. Whether you're an individual, whether you're an organization, or whether you're a government, when that action needs to occur, of course it needs investment. And I think when you have the global landscape, you see quite a variance, and it's highlighted in the report, quite a variance in the commitment to financing or funding and committing activity towards cybersecurity within different countries, within different types of organizations. And really the interesting thing with cybersecurity and this hyper-collected world that we live in is that it doesn't differentiate between those boundaries. And so you're quite often only as strong as the weakest point in that interconnected world. And so it really is something that requires a global effort. And, I think one of the things I would like to highlight here is that, repeatedly, one of the big things that we need to look at now is in the following from COVID-19 is really learning from the lessons that have already occurred. We've seen threats, as Saira pointed out, and they're highlighted in the report. We've had COVID-19, and one thing COVID-19 shows us is that any time that we're going to have a biological pandemic such as this, it's probably very likely that that event will trigger the risk of its digital or cybersecurity counterpart, which is a cybersecurity pandemic, and it's in fact what we've actually seen. The framework that I think has been developed here really is, something which moves us towards this idea of open policies and standards, which I think somebody else talked about as well. We really need transparency in the development of these standards, and that's one thing which I think is very important. And we then need, on top of that, a commitment to intergovernmental collaboration and inter-organizational collaboration to keep the standard alive, because the standard's never going to stay static.
To what extent is that intergovernmental collaboration that you talk about happening already or not happening?
Well, so I was going to come on to this. I think one of the big lessons from COVID-19 is that, in fact, we've seen a systemic failure in all of this. If I'm honest, I think what we've seen is quite a lot of isolationist activity, occasionally dressed up as a collaborative activity, and we have to address that head on. This has not been a model way to respond as a world to a global event. And it's something that we've got to get right. And we have to be very honest about that. Another aspect, which I think you could have seen very easily in what's happened over the last 9 to 10 months, is I've seen a sort of waxing commitment and waning commitment to protect and preserve the rights of the individual and the citizen when it comes to data. I know we have systems like Gdpr in place already, but you can see that there are opportunistic moves around this data. One of the things you talked about earlier on is what are the barriers? Why have we not seen enough in cybersecurity for health?
Right.
One argument, I suppose, is yes, there's a complicated system, and yes, there are latencies, and there is momentum in the system which makes it difficult to sway. That's very true. But the other way of looking at it too is that it's a gold mine. There is a huge amount of commercial interest and potential self-interest, etc., and protectionism that can circulate around the medical data. It is a potentially enormous market. And one of the risks, the key cyber risks I see when you look at the global perspective, is the possibility for cyber exploitation, what I call cyber exploitation, where some of the most disadvantaged in the world aren't given the protections on their data as we build a digital healthcare system. And they really are the most cyber vulnerable, if you like, as far as I'm concerned. So, I mean, I'll stop there, Folly. There's a few more points I'd like to make. But
you've touched on a number of important issues, including the disparities between countries when it comes to cybersecurity. And I want to bring back Dr. El Malgamed to talk about this. I mean, in the proposed global framework that's proposed in this report, do you think it's flexible enough to adapt to local needs and realities? You talked about the experience here in Qatar, but is this framework flexible enough to adapt to local needs and the realities while we're still maintaining a unified way forward?
Yes. So thank you. I want to come back also to one of these points. See, one of the biggest problems in healthcare and why security is even more complicated is because of the fact that the attack vectors are so huge. They're much larger, much bigger than any other industry, especially after the introduction. Just imagine how many devices are in healthcare systems, from defibrillators and MRI machines and so on and so forth. Each one of these devices, and there are thousands of these, are internet connected, or at least they're connected somehow. And all of these, while they serve a big purpose, they also could be used as a way to attack the system. Also, one thing in healthcare, and it's also available in other industries, but in healthcare, legacy systems, and the CIOs here will resonate very well with this. Healthcare has a huge number of legacy systems. By legacy systems, these are old systems that have not been converted. And the problem is, we come back to the investments that you've mentioned and the others have mentioned. Because of the huge cost that it would take to convert and to bring these legacy systems up to snuff, they typically are left alone and bashed. I've dealt with these in the telecom industry years ago when I was at Belcor and Telcordia and so on, that you just typically you know that the system works, but you don't know exactly why it works, but you leave it alone because you can't fiddle with it. If you fiddle with it, you would break it. The last point that you asked me to address.
Yeah.
See, the thing is, privacy is of the utmost importance here, right? So privacy is very important. And why is privacy very complicated in healthcare, much more complicated than other industries? Well, because you have many actors, right? The practitioners, you have the researchers, you have the consultants, you have the patients, you also have the patient's relatives that sometimes have access to the electronic medical records. All of these things, and you're trying to balance access control to the data, to the information, with privacy regulations. These two things together, you're trying to basically manage data leakage, unauthorized access, abuse of authorization, which is very real threat. The last point I want to say is that the majority, at least maybe 60% or so of data leakage is caused by insider threat, whether it's malicious or whether it's unintentional. And we have to protect against that as well. It's something that couldn't be ignored. And my heart goes out to the CIOs of hospitals. It's a job that is so thankless, but he's laughing because he knows what it takes.
Right.
Privacy is very important, but the complexities are so difficult. Security is very important, but the complexities are very important in healthcare.
So I guess we should go back to a basic question of how this happens. How do hackers gain access to healthcare data and networks? For example, in the case of the DCH health system in the US, hackers were actually able to seize patient files and lock them until they were paid money to release these files. Vartan, is this type of attack becoming more common today? Are they becoming more sophisticated?
So not only attacks, I would say, can become and are becoming more sophisticated, but the frequency is increasing. The capability of launching attacks are becoming less complex, so less sophisticated individuals can initiate an attack. But I would agree with Dr. Ahmed that we have a saying in the cybersecurity world and the risk management world that cybersecurity is not a technical problem, it's a people problem. And it's very much the case here. So to answer your question, I would say the majority of these kinds of breaches are due to employee negligence or human error or insider threat. So it is very much a people's problem. So if you go back and look at cases, more often than not, that's the case. So malware infection is because somebody opened a phishing email and clicked on a link. A successful email compromise because maybe perhaps the two-factor authentication wasn't enabled or it was a weak password, and so on and so forth. So yes, there are more sophisticated attacks, but still we are very much in that initial stage, especially in the healthcare industry, where this is why I like ECHO and what Dr. Saira has done, is because it sets out those kinds of essentials that need to be embedded in order for at least the basics to be taken care of. It's always about marginally reducing those risks step by step and step by step. So those still can be attacks, majority of attacks can still be mitigated by following certain frameworks like ECHO. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I do want to get the perspective of Arvind in India. Do you also agree that this is a people's problem? Having worked extensively across India, one of the biggest healthcare markets in the world, can you give us your perspective on the development of cybersecurity in India, and in particular how cyber governance has developed in recent years, and how organizations are ensuring that they meet the legal requirements in India?
Talking about the legal requirements, India has the Information Technology Act. It's close to about 20 years old. It's, for the lack of a better word, a little liberal. And it needs to live up to its times. And so what the government is doing now is coming up with the Personal Data Protection Bill. It's still in the parliament. It's gone to the Joint Parliamentary Committee for review as it relates to infringement on other aspects. So that when it becomes law, you need to take care of it. But what the government is trying to bring in here is an inclusive policy. Is trying to do is bring something in where you have cybersecurity by design. And that's what Vartan was alluding to. Yes, it is a people problem. And here, when you start developing enterprise systems, particularly in healthcare, where you are designing for privacy and security as part of your inherent DNA of the building block, you start taking care of stuff. And then overlay that with I won't find it uncomfortable saying an excessive overdose of training, because you just need to make sure that whichever direction you go, you are aware of your responsibilities, not just as a stakeholder, but also as a consumer on what this does, because an expected lapse can lead to so many people being affected. So I think it's a combination of that in terms of being educated, making it the DNA of the system. So in India, we are seeing this catch up. Obviously, there's a lot to go before we hit maturity and say that we are there. But I definitely believe that people are more aware, because the mobile revolution has definitely taken India by storm. It's done a lot of wonders in terms of the leaps in terms of digital enablement across the country. And organizations are taking it seriously. That means that almost we see all big health systems treat this as a board subject, treat this as a strategic subject. So that kind of lays stress in terms of how important, what's the importance people give. It's no longer an IT subject.
Right.
It's a subject that involves everybody.
Dr. Deepchana, Arvind says that people and organizations are taking this issue more seriously. So what then do you think is the next essential step in working with government and policymakers to embed the cybersecurity framework in practice?
Well, as I said to answer on your last question, really the lessons need to be learnt from previous incidents. Now we've got enough history to motivate action. I think that's the first thing. Absolutely, cybersecurity has to be inside boardrooms, and it needs to be inside government decision-making systems and processes too. That is something we've discussed for quite a long time, I think, and we've also talked a lot about in the cybersecurity community the idea of cyber by design. We have technical methodologies now, such as DevSecOps and things for developing safe tools. But what we really need is security by culture now, and I think this alludes to what Vartan was saying. And we need that cross-organizational understanding of cyber risk, and for people to be conversant in cyber risk and its potential ramifications right the way through the organization, whether you're government, whether you're industry, or whether you're academia. And I think that's really the next step is making sure that we've got the right competence right the way through our organizations, but also that we are seeding the right kind of talent pipeline and talent development for the next few years for this growth of what is going to continue to be a major issue. And I think you heard from some of the numbers a second ago, this isn't something that's going to sort of slowly fade away. It's going to become a more and more important problem. And we need to ensure that we invest in the talent to pull that through. And so that, the next generation of people in the workplace are going to be well equipped to understand cyber risk and have it, as I said, in their culture.
Dr. Tara Ghafoor, I mean, even if we're well equipped to understand cyber risk, and even if there's awareness across all levels and sectors, is a robust cybersecurity system able to handle and adapt to continuous or unexpected challenges such as the COVID-19 crisis that we're facing today?
Absolutely. You've got to see, even in the past couple of months, what we've seen is a rapid introduction of so many new technologies. And that's really to ensure that we're still able to give patients access to healthcare. Across the world, we've seen remote technologies being introduced into healthcare, video consultations, telephone consultations taking place, and we need to do that. And at the same time, the education piece is critical across the board. As people change the way that they work, they need to make sure that they are taking on that responsibility of making sure that cybersecurity is part of their training, part of their education, part of their responsibility into delivering patient care as well. At the end of the day, everybody who works in a healthcare organization is a custodian of patient data. And certainly, as we've seen with all these new technologies that have been introduced, we know that actually some of them are here to stay and it's not going to go back to business as usual. For that, what we need to do is actually, take a bit of a pause and actually look back at all the new introduction of all of these different technologies and actually look at the security profile of them and make sure that the ones that are here to stay are secure by design. As we move forward, that we're not going to have the problem, as Dr. Ahmed had earlier said about the legacy infrastructure. We can't have all of these technologies brought in, used for year upon year, but not have the full security profile of them. Right. But certainly, I think in a very quick way, the education part needs to be there for every professional that's working with new technologies, new systems, and that's how we need to quickly develop this piece and deal with something like a pandemic coming through.
Dr. Ahmed, your thoughts on this? How do we adapt to the constant changes?
Right. So let me tell you, the problem is so complicated as has been mentioned. So on top of everything, you have a supply chain, right? So the report aptly points to supply chain as a major problem, especially in healthcare, in all the devices. I can't imagine the nightmare to CIOs when they hear the word plug and play. So you have devices that become so easy, right, to integrate into the network, and people call them plug and play. And you also have devices that are cloud enabled, right? While you're trying to secure your parameter, you have devices that can grab an IP address and go online. So one of the things that we found that is very helpful here through the Ministry of Transportation and Communication, the Ministry of Interior, we have a common criteria lab. And the common criteria lab is a test lab where devices get tested and so on and so forth as a criteria to bring it into a operational system. I mean, I don't want to be repetitive, but I can't underemphasize the difficulties that we face by this sort of huge number of devices, and maybe a quarter of attacks are due to these devices. So it's a major problem, and people who are trying to defend the healthcare system are just they're the heroes because the problem and the magnitude and the attempts of the attack. I mean, I equate healthcare cybersecurity to national cybersecurity. Could you imagine if the healthcare systems were taken down during the pandemic? I mean, the problem is extremely serious, and I agree completely with what Barton said. It's a very serious problem. The difficulty on top of everything is that healthcare hospitals and ministries of health have to be realistic in a shrinking budget environment, so they have to prioritize. And what do they prioritize? Do they provide the healthcare, or do they secure the legacy system? You know what I mean? At the end of the day, they have to prioritize. Right.
But is that prioritization that you talk about, is it happening already in some places, you think?
It is. It happens every day. It has to happen every day. I mean, for those that are responsible for securing healthcare systems, whether it's at the national level or at an individual hospital level, they have to make those choices every day, and it's risk versus benefit versus how do you manage risk? At the end of the day, it's about risk. How do you manage risk? And how do you protect your environment given a limited amount of resources?
Right. Arvind, interestingly, what I found interesting in this report is that, where healthcare cybersecurity is concerned, low and middle income countries could have apparently an advantage on high income countries, on rich countries. The report talks about low and middle income countries having the opportunity to leapfrog the challenges in the high income countries. Do you agree with this? And are there examples of this already happening as we speak?
Definitely, yes, because low and middle income countries don't need to deal with some of the problems that the other developed or high income countries have. So the problem is the same. What you need to achieve, the end goal is well known or is well articulated to everybody. So it's a direct jump. So they don't need to go through those steps of learning. And that's a good advantage. And second, in this aspect, low and middle income countries also have some sort of a cost advantage because they're able to get their scales of power. So that also financially, while this could be a financial, better advantage, which is unconventional, that's where these countries have. And I think they just move faster because it starts making a level playing field, especially on a topic that is technology, that's intellectual. You start moving forward. So definitely, yes, these countries have a stronger advantage and they have smaller problems to deal with than the other countries. There's no baggage. So,
Rahman, do you agree with that? Do you think low and middle income countries have a stronger advantage than rich countries, despite not having the financial means that rich countries have?
There we go.
But they're a bigger target too.
I would say, yes, I would say that if you're approaching an information security management system, if you're setting up a system from scratch, it possibly would be easier, but provided you have the motivation to do so, provided you have the leadership to do so, the budget to do so, and some of the technology or the necessary means to do so. So pretty much touching on all of the points that we've touched on. Then to add another layer to it, I would say, then you don't have to do everything that's take frameworks, for example. You don't have to go ahead and set up a NIST framework if you're a tiny little clinic. You can just go ahead and follow some of the ECHO or Cyber Essentials or other typical smaller guidance frameworks to get the ball rolling, essentially. But in order not to, for the audience, not to paint a nihilistic kind of picture that it's so complex, what are we going to do, and so on, if I can break it all down, are there lots of challenges? Yes, there are lots of challenges. Can we solve these challenges? Yes, we can solve these challenges. Are they complicated and complex? Yes, certainly they are complicated, but as I said, we can gradually, through leadership, through the necessary frameworks like ECHO, step by step begin that process. Then it takes us to the next question. Have we learned from history? Would people immediately pick up and just get on with it and get their information security management system or risk management set up? Possibly not. Being human, possibly we would go back to the original statement I made, where it's people kind of shrug it away, or they rather focus on business. They don't understand the real tangible material implications of this. So that brings us to the next question, which is, if we are not learning from history, if we are saying we want something to resolve the entire health industry as a whole, how do we push that forward so that we don't have this essentially this counterpart to the pandemic, as Deep mentioned, as cyber being the counterpart to the next pandemic? How do we get to that point? So then that takes me to perhaps a contentious topic, which is there a need for some kind of regulation? Take GDPR. So GDPR pushed a lot of organizations to essentially, the way we say, up their game, to begin taking this seriously because it was legally required for them to do so. Now, and as contentious as this topic might be, a lot of people are opposed to this. Nevertheless, I think we should address the elephant in the room. Should this be, because it's to do with people's personal identifiable information, sensitive information.
And who regulates?
And who regulates, exactly. And how do we structure that?
You can take that up. I mean, what's your view on this question, this elephant in the room? Then that's the question of regulation, and who regulates this?
Yeah, exactly. And who regulates it? How do we structure that? Around which frameworks? ECHO is a wonderful beginning. Perhaps others are out there as well that we can pull in from. And again, is it too much perhaps for certain organizations? Whenever the topic of regulation comes in, a small clinic will say, are you joking? I cannot do this. I cannot afford this. I don't have the budget for this. I don't have the expertise for this. How am I going to buy solutions for this? So all of these things have to be taken into account. When people throw regulation out there, you really have to consider the mature organizations as well as the small mom and pop shops that have opened up. They're trying to get their business going. We have to keep business in mind, basically.
Briefly, your thoughts on regulation, and then I'd like to come to questions from the audience because we have quite a few questions from our audience. Just your thoughts first, Dr. Ghafoor, on the question of regulation. Who regulates?
Absolutely, and I think what Barton was saying is that disparity between the kind of cyber mature organisations to ones who are, much smaller in size. But again, if you don't bring in some element of regulation, then you kind of think, who are these organisations accountable to in terms of cybersecurity? And as we rely more and more on digital technologies to provide healthcare, and we know that actually there is a huge fallout in terms of the impact of what would happen if a system fails, essentially because of a cyber attack. You need to make sure those systems are robust, are in place, and there is some accountability and regulation. Certainly in terms of what's happening in the UK and from our experience here, this has changed over the past couple of years. But I think at the same time as having regulation, what you need to have hand in hand is to make sure that you're providing organisations with support, with education, with help in making sure that they can attain the levels that they need to report back to. So if you don't have those hand in hand, then regulation is one of those things that, you can have it there, but you can, continually fine a healthcare organization for not meeting those regulatory requirements if you're not helping them achieve all of that as well. And you've got to give them time in which to do this. Yes, you've got some who are going to be much ahead of the curve, who've got, all of these elements in place, but then there's the much smaller ones who are going to need a lot more help, and that's where you need to invest.
Right. That was an incredibly timely and meaningful conversation. Let's get questions from our audience now. I mean, thank you all very much, of course, for sharing your views and offering us solutions on how we can scale up cybersecurity in healthcare and provide a secure patient-doctor environment. So our audience who've been watching us online have quite a few questions for you all. So I'll now open up the floor to questions, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. So the first question goes to Dr. Deep Chana. And the question, Dr. Chana, is why has there been such a lack of investment for health cybersecurity compared to other critical sectors? I think we touched on this a little bit before, but you can perhaps share your views with us on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the other panel members through the discussion have maybe touched on this a little bit. And as I said before, I think there are a number of different factors. One of them, of course, is that the priorities in the healthcare system are quite often, in a different place. You're just trying to deal with very restricted budgets and deliver the healthcare system and deliver good health and well-being to people. The focus has been on that in the past. And so you can argue that the sort of data piece has crept up on the industry as it has in other industries as well. And I think in limited budgetary environments, it then becomes very difficult to say, well, look, I'm going to do this whole cyber thing whilst I'm not doing the kind of frontline stuff that I need to do. And again, COVID-19 has shown us that. So I think that is certainly a big factor, and that then obviously motivates perhaps more investment, but also maybe smarter ways of operating and working and the cultural things that we've talked about as well. I do also, however, think, when I go back to what I said previously, is that there are also some vested interests that we have to talk about, right? There are clear interests around not regulating some of this space or not creating standards. We are already quite far down the line of seeing several instances around the world of data grabs effectively on health data. And again, there's a tension between all of these different things. But I think probably the first part of my question is the predominant driver. The second is the emergent.
All right, thank you for your response. Dr. Ahmed, a question here for you. You mentioned legacy systems that are often left alone for fear of breaking. And the question is, how can organizations try to make these systems more secure as part of their cybersecurity planning?
Well, so that's a chicken and egg problem. This is a very costly process. Anybody that has been involved in doing a data migration project, anybody that's been involved in doing an ERP system project, SAP or Oracle of that nature, knows the enormity of these tasks. Migrating a legacy system is just it's a humongous task that most people end up at the end of the day just leaving it alone. Back years ago, we used to call it a spaghetti ball because it's just so intermingled, you don't know what to do with it. So if you had an unlimited budget, yes, you will tackle that problem. If you don't have an unlimited budget, you fence that system, you sort of limit its access through the internet somehow, and you live with it as long as you can until you retire it. If I may comment on what David had mentioned on regulation. See, regulation and laws can only go so far, in my opinion. First of all, you have to attribute the problem. So attribution in cybersecurity is a big problem. If you can't have accurate attribution, how could regulations and legal aspects work? So we need to advance the way we do attribution. And the solution here could be technical. I know that we're looking for social and cultural, but to this problem, the solution may be technical. We have to be more proactive. We have to perhaps use artificial intelligence to do predictive analysis of logs in order to anticipate problems before they occur. And I'm very impressed, for example, here in Qatar, this type of technology is used, at the relevant ministries. The Ministry of Interior, they use predictive analysis on all kinds of logs to try to anticipate problems before they occur, and to be able to do better attribution. If you have better attribution, then you can pursue legal routes. You could do regulation and so on. Sorry for deviating from your question, but
that's okay. That's okay. I think it's important that you pointed out that more proactive use of AI, artificial intelligence, we talk about AI a lot lately, is needed to anticipate some of the problems before they actually occur. Anticipation is key, isn't it?
Also, I'm sorry to interrupt you. The cybersecurity is becoming more like a data analytics problem. It's to a certain degree, not 100%, but to a large degree, is becoming a data analysis problem.
Okay, let me move on to Vartan. A question here for you, Vartan. You'd mentioned in your comments earlier that there's a 4 million person shortage in the industry right now. And so the viewer here asked, what is the best way to recruit people in healthcare where perhaps salaries will not be as high as in other sectors?
I think this is a fascinating question. It's definitely a question for some government officials and ministers, and as well as some organizations. But in terms of training courses, whoever asked the question, so if the interest is coming from the point of, are there courses out there? Is there shortage out there? Can I train and can I essentially prepare and get in the market for this? Absolutely. This is one of the most fascinating, one of the most exciting jobs out there. So equally, organizations themselves, leadership, if they are taking this seriously, they can assign a budget for training. They can assign a budget for training for CIOs, as we mentioned or risk managers or compliance managers, as we mentioned in this conversation on this panel. This is a continually evolving field. So continual training is absolutely necessary. So not only should there be private-public partnerships, government initiatives, budgets are set aside to train. University courses are there, plenty of them, they're fantastic, but also organizations themselves, even if they're small, it doesn't take much to set aside a budget and send an individual to get a course with one of the governing bodies or one of the frameworks, or an online course to basically get up to speed.
Right. Well, just to follow up on that, there's a question here for Arvind. Arvind, a question just to follow up on what we just heard there from Vartan is, we often hear from clinicians and admin staff in hospitals that they don't understand the cybersecurity guidance that's sent around, and they feel that it should be the job of IT departments to address these issues. So what can organizations do to better encourage all staff to engage with cybersecurity measures?
Well, one, to be fair to the clinicians and those healthcare workers, I think we need to talk in English to them so that we are not talking a language that scares them, and thereby they think that it is some rocket science. So right. I think the technology teams are guilty of that crime. But I would say an inclusive policy. Getting everybody to work together to understand the problem statement and start defining what are the way forward. Obviously, as you're defining the way forward, you know the challenges in front of you. That means that the solutions you make will be inclusive, even though sometimes people would feel that it's getting infringing on their freedom and their free movement that they had without the earlier curbs on policy making and even compliance. So I would say let's make it inclusive, more training, talk about it in simple language, and articulate in terms of impact and how we can help mitigate. Rather than always talk about the problem, if we can talk about the mitigation also, talk about the solution, I think we're going to have everybody join hands and make this happen and not make it sound like IT.
Yeah, make it inclusive. That's a very important point you make. Dr. Ghafoor, another question here for you, and this is relating to the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, because this is what a lot of people are dealing with and experiencing right now. The question is, we've seen an increase in the number of cyber attacks against healthcare organizations during the pandemic. We mentioned the WHO earlier before. Why is this, the question is, and what has been the impact on healthcare?
I think cyber attackers are now realizing the potential havoc that you can cause using a cyber attack. And obviously, we were already going through such a chaotic time with the pandemic itself and the misinformation surrounding that, that when you throw in a cyber attack into the mix, that you know that the consequences of that can be very significant to catastrophic. I think earlier we had one of the discussions that I think it was Dr. Ahmed mentioned that, could you imagine that a cyber attack in the midst of this pandemic would be utterly chaotic against any given healthcare system? And I think the big issue is, I think cyber hackers, attackers, etc. They realise now that the potential impact it can have on the cyber on any given healthcare organisation, and using that vehicle of a pandemic when everybody is using that across social media, across all different emails that you send to various people, etc. That using that as a target, that is much easier to do that. And obviously, healthcare organisations are out there. They are the ones being contacted for various bits of information. For example, the WHO and the CDC were giving out lots of information about the pandemic. Also, there was the Johns Hopkins Centre about the tracking of the pandemic as well. That was another kind of target in terms of their web domain as well. So right. It's a very easy vehicle to kind of put that onto. And across the healthcare sphere, essentially, all different organisations were facing the same issues, that you were moving to remote systems. Healthcare workers were moving across different areas that they potentially may never have worked in. You were having different people accessing systems because there was an urgent need to do so, and hence it was more vulnerable.
Okay, that was a question, by the way, from Galia Al-Ail, who's watching us online. Thank you, Galia, for that question. Now, before we end, I'd like to go around and ask each one of you in 1 minute to tell me what you think, to end our discussion today, a final word, a message that we leave with. What do you think is the best way to speed up progress in cybersecurity within healthcare? Dr. Deep Chana, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Folly. Great session. I'll keep it very simple. Isolationism must give way to open collaboration. And that's, right the way through the government systems, right the way through our private sector, and with our sort of individual behaviors and cultures within organizations as well. So I think that's the key thing. And we could talk a lot about the various technical approaches, and there are many. Machine learning and AI is coming around the corner as well, making this kind of framework that's been published even more urgent for people to get on board with. So I think transparency and collaboration, as I say, needs to give way to perhaps some of the more isolationist things that we've seen.
Dr. Ahmad, your final thoughts. What's the best way forward to make healthcare systems more secure?
Yes, I think the most important thing is to increase and improve partnerships and communication across agencies, whether at the national level or internationally. The criminals are communicating all the time, very easily, exchanging information. The responsible agencies are not communicating as well and as easy. If I also may add that, in my opinion, during the COVID, the biggest threat was coming from misinformation on social media, which was not the topic today, but that caused a lot more chaos than cybersecurity.
We'll get to that topic later on today at WISH, by the way.
Very good, very good. So partnerships and communication will go a long way to address this problem, in my opinion.
All right, thank you for your thoughts, Dr. Ahmad. Arvind, your final thoughts then. How do we speed up progress in healthcare when it comes to cybersecurity?
Start now, start immediately. Every step counts. And don't hesitate to communicate. Don't hesitate, even if there's a mistake, deal with the design. Whether it's legacy or the new age systems, deal with the design. But every step counts. Don't worry that it's a problem that's bigger and difficult to solve, but just start, and start sincerely and start in full earnestness.
Okay, thank you for that. Vartan Sarkisian, your final thoughts. What message would you like our audience to take away with them today as we wrap up this discussion?
Thank you, Foley. 3 quick points. First of all, it's important for leadership of businesses, organizations to remember that this concept that this is a tech problem, it is not a tech problem. There are tech solutions out there. It is possible to resolve it in a variety of different ways. So it's a people's problem, essentially, and it's a leadership challenge. So I encourage leadership, or no matter what size, to take this on fully and deal basically and start resolving it gradually. Second thing is, it is difficult, to earlier point, that the return on investment would be, it's difficult to find, to materialize. So they shouldn't look at it as, I put in this and I get that, but it's a more of a, it's an insurance. It's something that you're taking care of your customers, your clients, your employees, and so on. So that's an important point to keep in mind. And lastly, you do not need anything too complex. It's very, you can start with very certain basic measures, and that don't take much time, that don't take cost resources or money or funds. And yet there's a lot that an organization, even a small clinic, can achieve by following simple initial steps, achieving those, and then moving on to the next. So I actually want to leave it on a positive note that this is a challenge, but we are able to resolve the challenge. We just have to become more active and prioritize it.
Thank you for your optimism. Thank you very much. Dr. Ghafouri, you have the last word. You've presented the ECHO framework to us today. What is the next step?
Absolutely. So I think one of the key things about our message across cybersecurity and healthcare is always awareness that cybersecurity is a patient, or an attack on cybersecurity is an attack on patient safety. And this is something that we need to keep in mind first and foremost as we move forward. We've proposed the ECHO framework as a starting point. We are very thankful to everybody who's participated, both in the survey and all the experts who participated in the Delphi process to come to this framework. The next steps for us are to work collaboratively with organisations across the world to test and trial this framework to make sure that we can iterate and refine it and make sure that it can be used for the purposes it was created and be used in low middle income countries as well as high income countries. And we look forward to doing that and partnering across the globe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for your valuable insights today. As we've heard, in order to scale up cybersecurity in healthcare, it's important to promote a globally validated and unified cybersecurity framework, and that requires strong partnerships and commitment. Thank you once again for your insights. Thank you to our online audience who've been watching and taking part in this important discussion, and to the WISH 2020 team, of course, the Qatar Foundation, and all of its partners for making all this possible today. For more on cybersecurity in healthcare and all the other sessions at WISH 2020, visit the website 2020.wish.org.qa. From me, Fuli Batibo in Doha, thank you very much for being with us once again. Have a very good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.